Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Mayor Toni Hart makes New Haven tick morning and night and all weekend long. She's here in the WNHH studio for her weekly Mayor Monday checkup on what she and we are up to in the Elm City. Good morning, Mayor Hart. Great to see you.
Good morning, Paul. How you doing?
Good. If anyone out there has a question for the mayor, feel free to pop it up to us via Facebook Live. Go to the New Haven Independent Facebook page. You'll see the video right there. In fact, many of you are probably watching it there right now. Thanks to Gateway Community College and Bertram Moses PC for providing financial support for today's program. And speaking of Gateway, Mayor Hart, you are here fresh from Gateway Community College, where there was something going on this morning, wasn't there?
Yes, there was. There was a graduation from the Gateway to College program, which is a new program that is a collaboration between New Haven Public Schools and Gateway Community College.
So what's that all about? And why is there graduation in January?
Well, one of the things that we recognize is that there's some young people who become disinterested in school for one reason or another, and oftentimes they drop out or they just become disengaged, don't really come to school enough days to graduate. And so what we were doing is that we had alternative schools, and we still have one that would
combine the other ones.
Would basically provide programming for these young people, but they would be basically be, in buildings outside of their regular school building, and usually there would be between 35, 40 of these young people in a school. Well, as you know, we closed down 2 of those schools in the spring, and what took their place is something called Gateway to College. Gateway to College is a national program. It's in about half of the states in the country.
So it's named Gateway, even though just by coincidence our college is called Gateway.
Yes, that was a coincidence. So, there was keys met there, right?
Though not a full coincidence, because is it called Gateway partly because it's seen as a gateway to a stronger adult career?
So what this does is it identifies young people that have those qualities that aren't doing so well in high school, aren't going to graduate on time, and they then have an opportunity to go to a community college. And in this case, it's Gateway, and this is the first one in the state. And they are able to take high school credit courses as well as college credit courses and graduate. So these 3 young men are the first 3 graduates of Gateway to College. They worked really hard and got they satisfied their requirements for their diploma in record time. And I think they have an average of about 9 college credits each of them.
That's excellent. So I can get started.
Yeah.
Now, is that 6 months after they normally would have graduated high school, or 6 months before?
Well, I think they would have graduated last year.
Okay, so that got them over the line.
Well, I think they're early for their Gateway to College class. That's the way that I saw it. There were a number of the students.
Well, sounds
there.
great. Now, do we pay as the city for this, or where's the money come from?
I think that we were able to get grants to do that, and Patricia Melton from the New Haven Promise program knew about this and encouraged us to pursue.
Yeah, it seems like whenever something good in this realm comes from, she pops up.
Yeah, she does. Yeah. She was really,
That's interesting because, that's a tough group to work with and an important group to work with. In fact, a number of the signature initiatives of your administration have dealt with young people who are veering off, and before they fall off,
right,
try to find a way to get them going. I'm trying to think out loud about why some kids might be right for this Gateway program versus others who might be right for the alternative school. Because I would imagine you have more responsibility when you're going to community college. So you need to have self-imposed structure, right? So there's certain kids who are falling out who need that alternative school that has a lot of traditional structure, and others who might do well freed from some of the structural restraints of conventional school.
There might be. I'm thinking of one of the young men who graduated. He actually quit high school so he could work.
Mm-hmm.
And
so he could show up at work. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and so he was working, and I think the fact that you have a community college that has classes at all different times of the day worked.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's a big part of community college.
Right. And so, look, we have a community that is stressed. A lot of our young people of a certain age have got to get out there and help the families, raise resources for the families, and that means they have to choose between work and school. And so I think for that kind of young person, this is appropriate. But I also think for kids who just we know they're smart, I know there are parents that know I've got a really smart kid, but for whatever reason, high school just isn't working for him or her, and I think that's another child who would benefit from this kind of program.
Caleb Negron shared the post. Thanks for checking out with Caleb. Anything strike you about the event this morning?
It was really, it was the young people. Each of them spoke. So when it's small, all the graduates can speak, and I was really impressed with these young people. They are really now committed to themselves and doing things on behalf of themselves, their families, and their communities. And they really know that they have a bright future and that they have a way forward in their lives.
Well, let's wish them the best, and congratulations to Gateway for getting that program going. You're listening to Mayor Monday, WNHH-FM 105, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So as I told you before on the air this morning, it seemed like just a really fun weekend, a great weekend in New Haven. And every story I was editing always ended with, and Mayor Harper's there said, "This is great." And we know one of the things was the MLK's birthday's not for another week, the holiday, but they start having the events, and the first big event is always the West Haven Black Coalition event, which was in New Haven this year because they're having renovations on the place they usually have in West Haven. And this was at United Church. Markeisha Ricks has a great story on it, which I loved about it, was talking about seeing King in the context of his times. Like now he's this everybody warm, fuzzy hero. He was even more of a hero in his times because he was dangerous to the status quo.
Yeah.
And and he spoke about issues like the minimum wage, more work for sanitation, more pay for sanitation workers, against the Vietnam War. And some of his issues now, as Markeisha pointed out, resonate with what's going on in Hartford this spring and winter. Will we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour? That's on the table, paid in family and medical leave. So that was interesting. What struck you about the event yesterday? I know you love the choirs from what's the student choirs.
I know, you always, they did Glory. It was so good. But at any rate, I think the fact that everyone recognizes we still have more work to do, that we have got to come together as communities, because this is really a combination between New Haven and West Haven, this event, and that we've got to work on some of these still pressing issues in our country, the issue of race, the issue of workers getting adequate pay. We still have accommodation issues.
What are accommodations?
Well,
in the old days, it was like blacks only water fountains.
No, and it was. And, if you think about it, just having access to affordable housing isn't it? I mean, if you sort of take the broad view of accommodation. So these are all of the things that we continue to struggle with. We struggle with education. We have an achievement gap. And so it's really an opportunity at these various events that recognize the contribution of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
And where do you see his mantle being carried the most? I see Reverend William Barber with his National Poor People's Campaign. I saw the Stacey Abrams campaign really had that feel to me in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see the legacy of King, the kind of justice-oriented civil rights organizing taking place?
Well, I still think that the NAACP does a lot of that work. I see it in sort of Christian community action and the work that they've been doing for years. And there are No More Crumbs campaign that they do almost every single year, and sort of keep that on people's minds. The folks that are advocating for the homeless, and those that are advocating for improved schools, to reduce the achievement gap and to get adequate funding. These are all things that really carry on the kind of struggle that was epitomized by the work that Dr. King did.
All right. And as I said, you listen to Mayor Monday, 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. I see a call from Bob. Bob, you're on the air with Mayor Tony Harp. How you doing, buddy? I'm not hearing him. Okay, I have to figure out what the issue is with the
With the phone.
Harry, we can't get Bob.
Hey, Harry.
Harry's our station manager. He makes it happen. Let's see if we can get. So, wait, yes, Bob. Hold on one more sec. And so I talked about how the last week we've had all these events where something kind of interesting happens in New Haven. At the end of the New Haven Independent Story, it says, and Mayor Tony Harp was there and said, "This is great." The one of them last week that really interesting me was a little bit under the radar. Markeisha Ricks did a really good story on that, and it was about an R&D center, research and development, right? Where they're building a company called Acuity Brands, and it's in a place you wouldn't normally think of for R&D. So it's up there on one of those higher floors on Century Tower, which is at Grove Street and Church Street. And they have a lab there. You don't usually think of labs. There's like lawyers' offices there. It's above a bank. It's right downtown. And they have 45 engineers have been working there in the last year. They moved their worldwide headquarters here. They manufacture all over. They're developing these sort of high-tech sensors for turning lights on and off. I just thought that was so interesting that that's happening up in the air of a downtown office building. And you cut the ribbon on that. And they're talking about bringing 35 more engineers in the next year.
I think it's amazing what goes on in New Haven.
But even like in that downtown cluster, you got 300 George Street, you got right over the line where the Yale Medical School, you got Science Park, you got District Now, and now up in the air in Century Tower above like offices, you have this kind of high-tech future job stuff happening. 35 here, 45 there. I think it's pretty cool.
I think that our city is buzzing. I'm really excited about all this.
And it's hard to tell that it's buzzing because it buzzes quietly. That's a quiet buzz. I had no idea. Do you remember when I was thinking about that building? So that's that big building across from Brugger Bagels.
Right.
Right where Church turns into Whitney and Grove. Do you remember when we were first in New Haven in the 70s? That was a very old apartment building. And it had a few offices. John Williams had his law office in there.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 80s, they blew it up. Late 80s, they blew it up. And there was some low-income housing. And they built that Century Tower there.
And that right around that area is the last piece of the trail that we want to get approved.
Oh, yeah. Now, do you have an update for that? Because Aaron Good wrote in on that.
Oh, you did? No, I don't. But we're still working on it, Aaron.
Because we've announced 3 times in the Independent that it was settled because they have the whole condo association on Audubon Street that agreed to the easement, all that kind of stuff.
No, I just thought of it because, once again, no, it's still not settled, but we are working on it.
Bob, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
You're there.
Bob,
all right, Harry, thank you for making it
quiet.
happen. What's going on, buddy?
All right. Hey, not too much. Hello, Mayor. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. After a weekend of football, Patriots won this weekend.
Go
Oh, are you a
Patriots.
Patriots fan?
No, I'm not a Patriots fan. I'm actually a Giants fan, so I'm kind of like in a little slow
That's because your
mode,
dad
but
came from New
still
York.
watching football. But my question to you, Mayor, was about the situation with Darnell Goldson, the president of the New Haven School Board, and the school superintendent, about him being exonerated.
I don't know what exonerated means.
Yeah, so let's let our listeners know what Bob's talking about. So the superintendent of schools made a complaint to Mayor Harp saying, I don't feel comfortable meeting with the Board of Education President Darnell Goldson. I don't feel safe. So Mayor Harp said, I feel like when I hear a complaint like that, I have to ask someone to look at it independently. So he got an attorney to look at it independently. And it was reported by Mario Boone that on Friday afternoon there was a meeting at City Hall. I was jealous because I was like, we are the only ones who know that something's going on secretly and show up. And he showed up. And you had a meeting there, he said, where it was...
Darnell's got to call you.
I hope Darnell heard that. So you had a meeting where you were revealing the results of this report. And the way it was reported on Channel 8's website was that it said that there was no merit to the charge that Darnell Goldson had acted inappropriately to the superintendent. Is that accurate?
I don't know if I would say it quite that way. Certainly there was no, and she was very clear that there was no, that there were, some people thought that there was some sort of sexual.
Oh God, I never thought of it that way.
I know, I didn't either. Even when she said that,
you and I are old prudes.
I know we are. That's what happens.
I thought it was like I feel harassed and I feel he's bothering me, not like for sex, like He's harassing
Yeah,
me.
and and I don't think it was, and it wasn't physical
Right.
threatening either, which it could have been. So it wasn't really clear at the time to me exactly what it was, but I think that we've clarified it. So the things that most people think, sexual harassment, no, that didn't happen. Physical abuse, no, and the threat of physical abuse, no, not that either. But and I think that we did have a meeting, and they had an opportunity to really talk to each other, and I thought that was really good. And they both, I think, understand each other better, and have made a commitment to work together on behalf of the young people.
So what did the
the city of
reports
New
show?
Haven.
If there was never an allegation of physical or sexual harassment, which I never understood it to be either, did it look into what was the substance of the complaint and the finding?
Well, I think it was really just a matter of a difference between who has what role. The report itself hasn't actually in paper come out yet. So when it does, it's going to go to the Corporation Council, and it should come out sometime today. But as I understood it, listening in that meeting, it really was role definition, and and really understanding personality types.
So it's sort of like, I get to do day-to-day decisions and you get to review it, that kind of stuff.
It was that kind of stuff, and and to really understand that sometimes some people are more ardent in the way that they defend their turf.
But was it less of a someone got cleared or uncleared, and more like, we found out you guys need to talk about, two need to talk about how you're going to do it, and did both sides say we're going to do things a little differently, or no?
I think that I think it was more that than anything else, that that the two of them really understand where there are differences, that in saying that that she felt uncomfortable being in a room alone. She recognized that many people could have taken that the wrong way, and she apologized for characterizing it in that way. But
did he apologize for anything?
well,
That's the last thing I'm going to burn.
I just have a follow-up question.
What do you think?
and here's what it is. And I believe I mentioned it on this show way back when you had this investigation of Darnell and the incident, whatever it was. Do you look back at it as a waste of taxpayers' money hiring this private investigator?
Not at all, because I didn't know what it was, and I, as the chief elected official in this community, I have an obligation when someone expresses concern, anyone, to look into it. So absolutely not, because had it turned out to be something more than it was, I would have been in big trouble because I didn't look into it.
Those good questions, Bob. Thank you. How much did it cost, for the lawyer?
I think he is on, I do believe that he has some sort of, what do they call it?
Retainer?
Retainer.
So he just gets paid a certain amount no matter what?
For all of the work that he does for the city. So I don't know that there was a specific charge for this per se.
Well, thanks a lot, Bob. Anything else for Mayor Hart before we?
Are we experiencing, or the city experiencing, any money issues as the result of the government shutdown?
Ooh, good question.
I don't believe that we are as of this particular point in time. I did go out to Tweed last week with Senator Murphy to point out that there are people in our city that are working for, they're not getting paid right now, and that we depend upon them for our public safety, our TSA workers out there. And when we looked at it, I think that there were about 55 individuals that have an impact, maybe 30 directly, and others through contracts. That's at Tweed.
Oh, at Tweed, yeah, because when we got downtown, we got the whole federal building.
Oh, yeah, no. I think that in the state itself, and I think that would include the folks downtown, there are about 1,500 people.
That's a big deal. I mean, when you look at Washington, they had a story in the Times about how just the entire economy got hit. No one's at the restaurants. I've talked to some people who, couples where they have to take out loans to pay tuition payments. So even though they'll get paid later, they end up having to pay now because the interest on those loans. It's
absolutely.
it's a tough thing all over Bupkis.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't like
now what about New Haven Harbor? I'm hearing this morning something about Rosa DeLauro.
Right, she
and
went
the
out to
Coast
talk
Guard.
to
They're
a
not
Coast
being
Guard
paid
family.
either.
Yeah, she talked about the Coast Guard.
No, the Coast Guard, yeah, that's a problem as well. And honestly, I spoke to a couple of restaurateurs who, they get business from the folks who work for the federal government downtown, and they've seen
Were you
a
thinking like
drop.
the Orange Street area? Because that really is that kind of lunch crowd at the
the
federal
Orange
building.
Street, and also some of the
State.
folks that are down on Worcester Square too.
Oh, really?
I mean Worcester Street. Sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow. And that's a good question, Bob. The Marquise Ricks was pointing out to me, I didn't know this, that
Have a good
the
day.
Coast, you too, buddy.
Okay,
The
take care, Bob.
The Coast Guard is not paid during the shutdown, whereas other branches of the military are because it comes from a separate funding stream. Yeah. And one of the Competition Independent thought that if you stopped having omnibus budget bills, if you kind of voted separately on different parts of the budget in the federal government separate bills, maybe you could avoid shutdowns. I don't know.
I would hope that Congress thinks about a better way in which to budget so that this doesn't happen again. I got to thinking about it, and I think it undermines our security too.
Oh, no question.
So I think if
TSA people are calling in sick.
Yeah, I mean, and not to mention the whole airline industry,
Yes, I
but
remember, yeah.
think about other countries that are not our friends and how they can use this against us. This is just not good.
Well, and all over the idea that there's some crisis that doesn't really exist at the border.
But there will if we don't get these people back to work, and I think that's the real problem.
All right, but the real opportunity is that you're getting to hear Mayor Monday right now. WNHH FM, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org and broadcast at 103.5 FM. We're here with Mayor Harp in the house. Well, there was a lot of other news last week besides cutting ribbons on things that are great. You went to an inauguration. My favorite part, I wasn't at the inauguration that you were at for the new governor and the lieutenant governor and everybody. My favorite part was that Ned Lamont invited someone who has been in this studio a bunch of times, who's a Republican state legislator from right around here, George Logan, grew up in the Hill, who plays in a Jimi Hendrix tribute band. And he played a version of Jimi Hendrix' Star Spangled Banner at the beginning of the inauguration with a lot of, he was in his suit because he's a Republican state senator, but he was playing his, he dresses up more, 60s when he plays the Toads. And he did a really good rendition. There was a video of it, with all that kind of feedback and distortion. And Lamont came in and was very sweet. His first thing he said was, Senator, I knew Jimi Hendrix and you're a kick-ass Jimi Hendrix. I thought it was a good tone. I thought it was bipartisan. It was fun. It kind of sent something of a message symbolically. What was your take on the inauguration in the first week of the Lamont administration?
Well, I think that everyone is hopeful. I was speaking to someone who, like me, supported Governor Malloy. I absolutely supported him. I think he did a good job. He's gotten a raw deal in terms of public opinion, I think. But
history's going to be good to him. No, I'm serious.
I think history will be good to him.
He dealt with some very tough issues.
And, but I do think that it's almost like the clouds have lifted, and that people feel hope again, which is really.
Really?
Yes.
You see, I hadn't lost hope.
I hadn't either, but, I've heard that from people.
Yeah.
I just think that people feel like there's a different new vitality and energy in Hartford.
So change is a time that there's an opportunity to do some stuff new.
Yeah.
And I saw that he brought in some interesting people, including the head of Metro North Railroad, to do transportation.
And, he grew up in New Haven.
Oh, really?
Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
He grew up in New Haven on Howard Avenue.
All right.
Right down to City Point. His mother, I think, is still there.
Now, can we, can we leverage that to get our new plan for the garage, little TOD?
We basically, prior to his coming to this job, when he was still at Metro North, we invited him down to talk about how we might work together to improve train service and down to New York from
Excellent.
here. So.
I know that's a big, in the last week, what I've heard from readers and others, in terms of new stuff we might want from the state, is people were very interested in your idea that you spoke about last week on this show. When you talked about Temple Medical and you thought it would be a good place for biosciences. And I went and talked to some people from Follow Article, and I heard from people very positive reaction to that idea, that it was kind of a creative idea. That's jobs for the futures. You have this big layout there. What I was told is that what's going to be so important is what the Lamont administration thinks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether you like Lamont or not, one issue he did get was tech. When we followed him on the trail, like at Health Haven Hub and stuff, he knew the language. He's been in that industry. His wife does, venture capital funding for that industry. And what I kept hearing about your idea was that it would be a good place for our needed new biosciences labs, because we've identified that's new jobs we can get,
Mm-hmm.
and we just don't have the space for it. That it's going to be very expensive to fit out the space. So if someone's going to buy it and put in bioscience labs, they can't afford to do it. That's the classic case where government infrastructure spending helps.
Right.
Do you think the Lamont administration is going to be open to? Do you plan to make a pitch to ask them for help retrofitting that space to change its use?
I absolutely do, and I know that they know that they're going to have to help in cities across our state, and I think that the thing that is really, I think, great about Governor Lamont is that he understands how important New Haven is, and supporting our growth through the businesses that emanate from the various studies and the intellectual work that is done
Right. The
here.
Yaleys to spin them off. I was told there are 5-10 companies that right now would move into new space in New Haven if it
Right.
exists.
And so, we have the ECIC program that is working
Elm
on
City
that,
Collaborative, right?
right?
Innovation.
And Connecticut Next. And I think we're ready to go to through them, to go to the state, to go to Lamont and say, we need this space here in New Haven, and you identified the perfect space.
And it's interesting to me, when I think about your idea, it is interesting to me because you came up with the idea in the first week of his administration. This
Mhm.
is something that was totally non-controversial and specific in campaigns that tend to be vague and controversial,
Mhm.
which was that, we have bonding money. We want to spend it in a way that creates jobs of the future in cities. That was something very clearly said.
Mhm.
And that to be first in line with a very specific ask seems to me like an opportunity.
I think it's a great opportunity.
All right, so let's hope that happens. Last week there was a unfortunate incident on. We had two cases a day where the same police officer encountered someone who's been wanted for a violent crime. This guy Francisco Sanchez, undercover officer. Early in the day, he spotted someone down who was wanted for crime. This guy led police on a chase from downtown to the tarmac of the airport into West Haven, back to Westville, over to Amity. He was caught. Then later that same day, Sanchez was involved with other officers locating a wanted man in Kimberly Square. And according to state police, there was an exchange of gunfire, quote unquote.
Mhm.
The guy did not hit the cops, but that's the most harrowing thing, obviously, that ever happens to a police officer when you go to work every day. It's always a thought, this might be the day I don't come home. And Sanchez did hit the suspect in the stomach. And then officers at the scene who caught this guy after he ran from that spot kept him alive till the medics came. They sat him up, they pressed on his stomach, they kept him talking. Their training kicked in, which is very interesting to me because when an officer is shot, that's a classic case when, as in any kind of group, your group protection adrenaline kicks in and you're angry about it. But these cops were able to stay professional and even help the person who just shot one of their own to keep him alive. But a lot's still not known about that incident because anytime an officer fires a gun, the state police investigate.
Right.
And that officer gets some days off because it's such a traumatic incident to
Mhm.
face that. Any thoughts on what you saw?
Well, I think that one of the things that that we've talked about before, and that I hope everybody in New Haven knows, is that we have the best trained police officers in the state, if not in the country. And I think that training kicked in. And so a person's alive today who wouldn't have been, and that frankly there was restraint. And so we'll see once the state police complete their investigation. But I think that I'm confident that we will see that our training paid off, and that the force that was used was, unfortunately, we believe, necessary. But it's up to the state police to make that determination.
Yeah, and it's tough. You want to jump when an incident like that happens. So sometimes an incident happens when you have real questions.
Right.
This was a case where at least I didn't hear anything or see anything, even like quietly, that would make me wonder that the police did something wrong. It doesn't. We have no reason to believe the police did anything wrong. But it's also important not to rush to judgment either way.
Right. Exactly.
It's like
So
I'm
we're
told
waiting.
that in a lot of cases, a lot of times police will make up a cover story and when there's a controversy But in more cases, instead of them doing anything wrong, they just kind of remember it a certain way, and
Mm-hmm.
they've talked about it, and then it might not end up being exactly that way. That's how you have to be careful. It's
Right.
unfortunate that we need the state police to come in because they have a very unimpressive record of investigating. I mean, remember that one after the Trump inauguration where they set dogs on a 67-year-old unarmed man because they're mad at something he did half a
Mm.
mile away. I mean, and then that guy was cleared.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about that, but hopefully the facts come out. You know, Reverend Sam Ross Lee had such an interesting point. I originally had a headline: cops kept cop shooter alive. Now I was impressed at what the police did.
Mm-hmm.
And he pointed out that he said, is someone who has actually shot a police officer but not hit him a cop shooter? And I think his point was, do we jump to too many conclusions right away? And then some police didn't agree with Reverend Ross Lee. They said, if you're shooting at a cop, then you're a cop shooter. And I think that got to the larger point of how quickly do we form conclusions
Mm-hmm.
about these things. I found that very interesting exchange. It's about a word, but language reflects
yeah,
deeper thoughts.
And think about it, like you would think someone's a shooter if they're shooting at you, even if they don't hit you. I'm surprised that that's a bone of contention.
All right. So you're not surprised that it's Mayor Monday here on WNHH 102.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenpen.org. We're here with Mayor Tony Harp. There was another suggestion made. So the Board of Police Commissioners now has a public comments section to its meeting.
Oh,
And
great.
Rodney Williams, who's kind of an activist about some issues in New Hallville, spoke. And he talked about how it took an hour for him to get a response at a burglary in New Hallville. And that's not unusual
Mhm.
because, we're very low on cops right now.
Yeah.
We're budgeted 495. We want to be at maybe 430. We're under 400, well under 400. And you have to prioritize, right? At the Public Service Answering Point, PSAP, that's our 911 center. They have to say if someone could be dead, rush them over. Okay, that burglary's gone. They're still going to be there an hour when we send them. And so Rodney was saying he thinks there should be some way to do a better job of both informing people the status of when someone's coming and get them there sooner for non-emergency, that people will report more crimes. And because fortunately our violent crime is way down in New Haven,
It is.
so we have the luxury now to pay more attention to
Mm-hmm.
quality of life crimes, maybe, although some would say you'd always pay attention to that because the roots of crime start with disorder. So he's a Reverend. Chief Campbell said that he agreed with Rodney Williams. He thinks there are ways you can improve it. And one way he thought he'd improve it is to return PSAP, the 911 center, to control of a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
So in the contract negotiations years ago, the city thought it could save money by turning that over to civilian control. So it's housed in the police department. It used to be a firefighter and a police officer were in charge. So we actually paid two salaries. We made it one salary, and we made it a civilian. And so police and fire unions obviously have had an incentive to say that it hasn't worked. People who've worked in PSAP wrote into this article. We wrote about it, and some said, there really isn't a difference who runs it. It's more like there are structural challenges that face any 911 call center. And he thought so. Chief Campbell would like to see that come back under police control.
No, he shared his thoughts with me, and then I also heard from Chief Alston that he would like to control it. So you see where I
am. So they want you to pay twice as much then.
Yeah. So I think that it's something that we'll have to try to work out. I know that the police feel very strongly about it, but maybe we should take a look at some of the difficulties that we have today. I think we're down-staffed there as well. And so why don't we take another look at it when we get it up and running the way that we really know that it ought to be? And
you mean the force itself?
The staffing.
Yeah, because that's what one commenter wrote in. Said there was just another article. I love when people tie articles together. Yeah. He said there's just another article that you don't have enough cops on the street to respond. So how does putting another one in there help you get cops on the street?
Yeah. So, I think that it's something that we are going to look at, that we're going to think through, but, we will probably take our time making any major change.
Okay. And that's kind of the way deliberative government. You don't have unintended consequences. Also last week, we finally, after 5 years, got passed a referendum required new civilian reboard.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is settled, at least in the alder's mind, that it will have subpoena power.
Right.
Others think that will be tested in court, including this police department's own lawyer in the Corporation Counsel's office, who boasted loudly at the first police commission meeting afterwards, and everyone's earshot, that there's no way that's going to pass legal muster, and we don't think that's really the case.
Didn't he talk to his boss?
That guy usually does not give a lot of opinions that are.
I'm shocked that he would say.
Well, he has a
such
long
thing.
record. He's the guy who told a federal judge a case should be thrown out of court because the press wrote about it. But
Okay.
so your sense is that it does have subpoena power.
Well, I mean, that's
That's what your corp counsel said.
That's what Corp Counsel says. And you know what? I almost think it's a specious issue. I've served on the board of
A lot of people think
alders,
that. Yeah.
and we've had subpoena power there when I was there. Never used it. Went to the state senate, subpoena power. Never used it. It was used only, I think, during the Rowland investigation, and not really needed. I mean, people just came forward. So, the police commission hasn't. I don't know when they last used it. So I don't know if it's the most important thing.
Well, you had more practical concerns. You were worried they wouldn't have a quorum. Now, in the final version of this bill that passed, Civilian Review Board, are you satisfied with it?
I think that they've tried to take into consideration ways to assure that people would be appointed, and hopefully that means that once they're, the executive order, the way that it was set up, required the community management teams to make appointments, and oftentimes they would forget to do that. So then you had trouble with quorums and all the rest of that. And so now it's my understanding that yes, they will do that, but that if they don't, that there are ways to get people appointed through the mayor's office.
Excellent. I noticed they set the bar kind of low. 7 out of 15 is a quorum. That's not raising it too high. And hopefully they'll get a quorum. Another thing that you went to last week, you said this is great, said Mayor Harp, who helped make it happen, was the Armory, the latest I Matter. These posters that artists are putting up showing young people in larger-than-life photographs that are quite good in public spaces. And there was one at the Armory on Gough Street that moved a lot of people. It was one of the, this is one of the moments where you kind of feel like New Haven comes together and puts all the acrimony aside. It was about a young man named Benjamin Brown. He's the grandson of Rita Edwards, former alder, and the current alder, her daughter. What was that like, that event?
It was as you point out, it was a very moving experience. You really got a sense of this young man who is struggling with very serious illness, of his family. Care, his family and his neighborhood. I mean, the people from the neighborhood were there. A lot of his relatives were there, and to have him on that building, bigger than life, saying, "I will fight," that just moves your heart. No, it really does.
And I know everyone there felt that way.
Yeah.
And the Armory was in the news as well because a historic demolition in New Hallville might create an opportunity to do new stuff with the Armory. I don't know if you saw that, but they're going to be taking down a building at 71 Shelton Avenue where they used to make bullets and other stuff for it, but there was also some nuclear work, I think, being done by the Olin Corporation back in the day. This guy named Schnurr Katz who developed some buildings around there, makes some office space and stuff and apartments. It has to come down because it's just too dirty. It has to be cleaned up. And they said at the Historic District Commission last week that it's going to open an opportunity, the recommendation from the state, because it's a historic building, that might create money to be given from the state fund to fix up the Armory.
Oh, yeah.
Like one of these swaps, historic building for historic building.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we had an article about that. It's on the homepage of The Independent. We had one of the guys who used to work on the bullets years ago in the factory in the picture. But yeah, so people think, because I know you've been struggling to, not just you, John DeStefano, forever. People have been trying to find a new use for that Armory on Gough Street. It's such a big resource there, barely used, but it's going to take a lot of money to retrofit. Any updates on that, if you can get some money from this swap?
Well, one of the things that we talked about just last week is whether or not there were some departments that we could plan to move in there over time if we could get the resources.
Like Board of Ed, right?
Yeah, to rehabilitate it. Yeah.
And then that opens up development, transit-oriented development possibility right from the train station.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, that'd be
and
good.
So, and the reason that it came up is that we have to renew our lease next year for the
Meadow Street.
For some of Meadow Street. So.
Well, that's another thing that's interesting about government. How many years it takes to do stuff.
Right.
So in the most hyper speed, best scenario case of what we're talking about now, I'm sure it would take a year at the very, very least. That's if everybody showed up, they had every quorum at every meeting, to transfer that money, the historic money, to help with the Army. Then you'd have to draw up plans. I know that Bill McMullen has drawn up plans in the past for the Army based on other ideas like the culinary kitchen. But then you'd have to have architect plans approved. That takes months on a good scenario.
Yes.
And then you have the leases when you'd move. So things, we elect people every 2 years. But things happen over 5-10 year windows, or in the case of some stuff in Fairhaven, like the clock factory that's finally getting renovated, and River Street, I hear there's some buildings there. That
And,
could take decades.
I saw Governor Malloy on Wednesday during Inauguration Day, and he reminded me that he was the person who basically agreed with me to find the money for the Q House, and he said, I hope you get that Q House built and you don't forget me. And so
You'll invite him to the event.
I'll invite him. We got to find a place to put his name, because when I called, he was very receptive, and he has not forgotten. And it obviously meant something to him, because he's done hundreds, probably thousands of buildings since he's been governor.
And I think that happened
years.
around the time of his reelection 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I noticed that he would have a way when he go places to try to pick up on what's important to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he picked up that was a very, in practice and in symbolism, an important project for Dixwell community and
Right.
New Haven at large. I think he understood that.
And he hasn't forgotten. So it's really important to him that he did it for this community, and he wants people to remember that.
All right. School board, we have 2 vacancies, one coming up and one now. Frank Redente retired, and Jim Elcotto need to be reappointed, which has been somewhat controversial. Any updates on those? Do you think Cotto's reappointment will be approved at the full board?
I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping
It's not up
so.
to you.
It's not up to me. It's up to the board. So we'll see. He certainly went through committee unanimously, but who knows what the board will do. And I'm interviewing people for the other position.
Any leading contenders?
I don't really want to sort of mention anybody right now, but we'll see what happens.
Educators, lawyers?
I think we'll look at educators and lawyers.
Okay, not getting anything out of Mayor Hope on that one today. And then there's a new affordable housing task force report. Been studying ways. You have a commission, the city all around this commission.
I haven't seen the report yet, but I hope to see it.
It was
soon.
yesterday. Was kind of. It came out last week. It was kind of the ones that interested me the most, because there are 8 million. That's approximate number, 8 million. Recommendations in the thing. 2 that interested me that were different. One was to have, the Housing Authority has this nonprofit arm that develops.
Right.
The Glendower, and the idea was that they start taking on projects in the suburbs.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because there's a state law that helps people get approval in the suburbs if they'd be denied for unfair reasons that are hiding other reasons. So one idea was to have them build and manage some stuff in the suburbs. I don't know, let's go to that one.
That's interesting, yeah.
And it's another way also that it's kept the Housing Authority, I think, solvent as they changed with the times of the way of creating a nonprofit spinoff that use their expertise, which is important on how you manage and build low-income housing.
No, they've done a really good job here.
That was very smart on their part. Another one was to move neighborhood housing development from city government in LCI, Livable City Initiative, over to the Economic Development Corporation, which is kind of quasi-public organization. What did you think of that one?
I really would love to chat with my staff at LCI. I know they were involved in on this task force, and so I'd like to hear what they have to say about it. It's certainly not something that's immediately off of the table.
Mm-hmm. Then we've talked over time on the show about the future of the Church Street South property. The general outlines have been agreed upon: 900 to 1,000 new apartments, mixed use, mixed income, preserving the number that were there before, the 301. We talked about how do you make the numbers work to preserve affordable housing. One idea you had mentioned is to take part of the property and have that be a publicly built affordable housing while you have the private developer build the market rate housing. We talked about how in Washington, they're having private developers get permission to build new housing in return for putting a surcharge on market rate rents. Up the rent a little higher in market rate to subsidize affordable housing so that you don't need to go out and get the public subsidies. Your administration is sinking for the second time, I believe, a federal grant called Project Choice that would get the money to put that affordable housing into the project as it's privately built, as well as to fix the Robert Wolf apartments.
Mhm.
Where do we stand on that, and what's your thinking on the best way?
Well, I know that I've gone to Washington with Karen DeVos Walton because I think if you remember, um, we were trying before we started tearing down the project. Well, we're not tearing it down. Before we relocated everybody, we've been working with the folks at HUD there to try to make sure that they could put together a package that would work to replace the housing. So we've applied for the choice grant. I think we've done it already twice, so this will be the third time. And I think that's the most. I think that works the best for us. But if that doesn't work, it's my sense, at least prior to the Trump administration, that we might be able to work things out with HUD to come up with a way to support the 301 units that we need to get on that site.
All right, and even though this isn't your bailiwick, you're a mayor, not a congressman or senator, but right around us every day, this incredible drama is taking place in Washington now with the new revelations about the FBI thought that the president was colluding with Russia. And the Mueller report's about to come out, and the Democrats I mean, there's a real crisis siege atmosphere. You have the government shut down and brinksmanship about that, and you have all this swirling stuff that may or may not be impeachable. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that I think like most Americans that we feel a little stressed about our overall democracy, and we fear that it's in danger in some ways. And so I keep look, we are so proud of the balance of powers, and we saw for a whole year where the balance of powers didn't work. All of us are looking at Ruth Bader Ginsburg and wishing her the best because we don't want that court to get any more conservative than it already is. And it's all of these things every single day that undermine the confidence of what I would consider average Americans who pay attention in this government. And it's unfortunate. And, I think it's dear and precious, and we have to really fight to assure that we survive this.
Yeah, every day we operate on these two levels in our brains. Local is where we make things happen. You're running a city, all the issues we talked about on this hour.
Right.
And there's other things just happening around us.
I know.
Some of us read it every hour in the New York Times to see what the latest revelation is. It's crazy.
It is. And it's frightening for a lot of people. And I think some people, because it's so stressful, they just tune it out. But I think we've got to know that, this is a point in time where we've got to stand for our democracy. We really have to make sure its systems work. And right now, we've discovered that it matters who's in charge. Yeah. And if we don't take it seriously, we could lose. We could lose what we value, what we hold dear.
I forget if I asked you last week. Do you have any early favorites for president?
No. I don't. I just know it's
got
to be somebody else.
Yeah, see who emerges. All right. Well, today it was you, Mayor Harp, on Mayor Monday. Thank you for joining us, as always. It's a great way to start the week. And we're going to thank Gateway Community College, home of the Gateway to College program, and Bertram Moses PC for providing financial support for today's program. Take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, which formed at a Martin Luther King Day event, I think 15 years ago, 20, at Michigan, Israel. Performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. We know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.